You're out in the woods, far from anyone, when you hear a voice in the dark. But who could it be? Tonight, I'll share 3 terrifying true camping horror stories that will make you think twice before setting up your tent again. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend camping trip with my friends in the Colorado wilderness. We had everything set up: tents, campfire, and plenty of snacks. The evening was perfect, a cool breeze rustling the trees, and the sound of crackling fire filling the air. Around midnight, the stories started. We were all gathered around the fire, talking about the spookiest things we'd ever heard. As the conversation grew darker, I noticed something strange. My friend Anna, who was sitting directly across from me, kept glancing over my shoulder at the woods. At first, I thought she was just nervous about the dark, but then I saw her eyes widen. She whispered, "Did you hear that?" We all fell silent. The forest was eerily still. I strained my ears, but I couldn't hear anything except the occasional snap of the firewood. "Maybe it's just a deer," I said, trying to brush it off. But Anna wasn't convinced. "I swear I heard a voice," she said. It sounded like someone calling my name. Everyone laughed it off, but as we continued our conversation, the whispers started again. At first, they were soft, faint, almost like whine through the trees, but soon they became clearer, almost as if someone was standing just outside the light of the fire, whispering our names one by one. Anna and I exchanged nervous glances. "Did you hear that?" she asked again, her voice shaking. This time, the rest of the group heard it too. The whispers were now unmistakable, coming from different directions. Our laughter quickly died as we all grew tense. We stood up and tried to peer into the darkness beyond the firelight, but saw nothing. The whispers faded just as quickly as they had started. We decided to sit back down and try to enjoy the rest of the evening. But none of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched. The night grew colder, and the sounds of the forest seemed to grow louder. Every snap of a twig or rustling leaf sending a wave of unease through the group. Just as I was about to suggest we go to bed, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice. It wasn't just a whisper this time. It was louder, clearer, and unmistakably human. "Ethan." I froze. It was my name. But no one was standing near me. The fire cast long shadows across the campsite, but there was nothing. No figure, no movement. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. Nothing. I turned to my friends, but they were all staring at the woods, just as confused and terrified as I was. We didn't waste any more time. We packed up as quickly as possible, leaving our gear behind in our panic. We hiked back to the car, not stopping to look back. The entire time, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, as if someone was right behind me. We didn't talk much during the hike back. None of us dared to ask who or what had been whispering, but we all knew one thing: something or someone was out there, and we had no intention of finding out what it was. I've always loved camping in the remote forests of Montana, but this trip was different. My friends and I decided to hike deeper into the woods than we had ever gone before, away from the usual campsite. We set up our tents in a secluded spot near a small creek, with only the sound of running water and the occasional bird call to keep us company. That night, as we gathered around the fire, the usual stories were shared: ghost stories, creepy urban legends. But there was an unsettling feeling that I couldn't shake, like something was watching us from the shadows of the trees. Around 2 a.m., After everyone else had gone to sleep, I decided to get some fresh air. I stepped outside my tent, leaving the warmth of the fire behind. The air was cold, and the forest was unerringly quiet. As I walked a short distance away, I noticed something strange. The shadows of the trees seemed to be moving, though there was no wind. The longer I stared, the more I realized the shapes in the trees weren't just shadows. They were figures, tall and silent, watching me. My heart began to race. I stepped back toward the firelight, but the figures didn't move. They remained perfectly still, as if waiting for me to do something. I quickly returned to my tent, my mind racing with fear. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the shadows were too distinct, and there was no way I could have been mistaken. The next morning, I told my friends about what I had seen. They laughed it off, assuming I had been spooked by the dark. But when we packed up to leave, we noticed something chilling. Our tents were surrounded by footprints. The tracks were large and seemed to lead off into the woods, disappearing into the trees. But what made my blood run cold were the marks in the dirt. The deep, claw-like scratches, like something had been dragging its hands along the ground. That's when I realized that what I had seen the night before wasn't just my mind playing tricks. There was something out there, something that had been watching us. We didn't stay long after that. We packed up our things and hiked back to the main trail as quickly as we could. But even after leaving the woods behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following us, watching our every step. To this day, I don't know what those figures in the trees were, but I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, of knowing that something was out there in the darkness, waiting. It was our last night of camping in the Idaho wilderness, and the air had grown chillier than usual. My group of friends had been enjoying a long weekend of hiking, fishing, and campfires, but something about the final night felt off. We had just finished our dinner around the campfire when one of our friends, Mark, suggested we take a night hike to a nearby lookout point. The sky was clear, the stars were bright, and we figured it would be a good way to end the trip. We started the hike just as the sun was setting, the trail winding through thick trees. Mark led the way, and I followed behind, chatting with Sarah and Ryan. After about 20 minutes, we made it to the lookout point. The view was incredible. A sea of trees stretched as far as the eye could see, and the only sounds were the rustling of the leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. We stayed up there for a while, talking and laughing, when Mark suddenly stood up and said he was going to explore a little further. We didn't think much of it at the time. A half hour passed. No sign of Mark. We called out for him, but there was no response. We assumed he had wandered off the trail or was just messing with us. After all, Mark was always the prankster of the group. But as we waited, something didn't feel right. It was as if the forest had become unnaturally still, like the world had quieted down around us. We decided to go looking for him. The darkness had fully settled in, and the only light came from our flashlights. We retraced our steps down the trail, calling Mark's name. That's when we heard something that made my blood run cold. A scream. It was coming from deeper in the woods. A sound so terrified, so raw, that it made my stomach turn. We rushed toward the sound, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. When we reached the source, we found Mark's flashlight lying on the ground, its light still flickering. There was no sign of him, just his backpack, half open, lying beside it. We searched for hours, but there was no trace of Mark. No footsteps, no sign of struggle. It was like he had just vanished. The next morning, we reported Mark's disappearance to the authorities. They sent search teams out into the forest, but after a few days, they found nothing. It was as if Mark had simply disappeared into thin air. I'll never forget the look on the sheriff's face when we told him about the scream. He said there had been similar disappearances in the area over the years, always in that same stretch of forest. He called it the vanishing point, a place where hikers and campers sometimes disappear without a trace. To this day, I can't help but think about what happened to Mark. He was gone, just like that, with no explanation. I don't go camping in Idaho anymore, and I never will again. And every time I hear a scream in the night, I wonder, is someone else out there, lost in the woods, waiting to vanish? If you made it this far, maybe you belong here. Subscribe to Whisper Cage, more true horror is waiting.